Welcome to Exhuming the Truth, a podcast dedicated to cold cases, missing persons, systemic injustices, and the art of forensic science that seeks answers when silence remains. My name is Asha, and I'm a forensic scientist and a criminologist, and in each episode, we examine the evidence, the systems, and the human stories that are often left behind. This isn't just about true crime. It's about truth, it's about accountability, and it's about giving a voice to those who deserve to be heard. Thank you so much for being here, and let's jump right in. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. I have a couple of things to touch on for housekeeping, so if you just want to hear the story, skip through without amazing chapters, features, love that for us. And also love that for you, because lots of people don't like to listen to me waffle on. I nearly got a bit choked up in my intro today because my name is no longer Asha Walther. It is Asha Carmody, which is absolutely insane. I'm saying that while I'm looking down at my wedding band on my finger right now. We just got married on Friday the 13th, of course, something morbid and very much like us. It was the most incredible day. I honestly could not rewrite the thing to go any better. Even with the little mishaps, it just the whole thing was comical. It was fun. It was funny. We had a great day. So I want to say thank you to everybody here, you guys, for allowing me to have that time off with my partner and my family. I am back. I was back as of yesterday. Yesterday was a bumpy day to come back in because it was just so busy. So I was back as of yesterday, and I am back until Thursday of next week, which I believe is the 26th, but I could be wrong. I'm not looking at a calendar right now. I'm back until then because Friday of next week I am off on our honeymoon. We are going to Bali, kid-free, which is going to be fun, but also interesting. I have no idea what we're going to talk about, to be honest. We haven't gone anywhere together with our kids, so it's going to be absolutely wild, let alone in overseas. I was going to say interstate, overseas. So, yeah, it's going to be an interesting ride. Now, in this period of time that I had off, I kept trying to explain to my friends and my bridesmaids how difficult it was actually having the time off, even though I did have it off and I enjoyed it. At the back of my mind, I'm trying to not worry so much about all of the families and cases that we have, which is naturally incredibly difficult. I tried to put my phones and devices away so that I wasn't overly concerned, but a lot happens in that short amount of time. We had one person go missing who was then later found, unfortunately, deceased. This is only in a matter of days. This is obviously right after Rob Snyder was found. We had a lot of questions about that come in when I was away. We had a lot of questions about Luke Hazelwood Part 2. Now, in my episode for Luke Hazelwood, I did say I was going to do a part 2. It was going to be a bit more geographical. Now, I did script that. I wrote that up. I was really happy with it, but then it got a little bit messy for a moment. I had to speak to the investigating officer in Lancelin in regards to Luke's case about a few things that I was receiving. And then I was also having conversations with other people who knew Luke, and bits and pieces were just coming in and also being passed on. And it got very busy and a bit hectic, to be honest. And I just wanted to wait for that to clear before I did that next episode because I didn't want to hinder anything. That's kind of all I can really say right now about that. But that episode is coming. But today's episode is actually going to be one of two parts. Now, this is one of two parts that I've already done because I did a bit of a deep dive into it today and a little bit last night for today's episode, and then part 2 of this episode. Now, this is one that we're going to talk about quite extensively on Sleuth Society. That has been a bit of a slow burn again, just because fresh into the new year, all of the wedding planning was a lot, the honeymoon planning and things like that. So when I get back, everything should start to run smoothly, fingers crossed, we hope. I am available this week and next week, but I do have a couple of private client appointments and things like that. But outside of that, I'm replying as I can. So you can get back to texting. In fact, even when I am off, you can text and call and email. It's just my response time is going to be a bit delayed. I am, however, trying to tee up with my good friend and editor, Josh. He is going to try and take over the page for me when I'm on honeymoon so that you do have someone there to speak to if he can help you, because I have overloaded him with information. Now, I know this has been a bit of a waffle on, as my kids like to say. Mum, you're waffling on. And my kids, by the way, was so friggin' cute at the wedding. They're 7 and 11, and they were dressed up as ring security. Cutest thing I've ever seen. I'm never going to stop talking about this wedding. It was honestly the best day of my life. And usually nothing ever goes to plan for me. So this was just absolutely wild that this went to plan. I would say I would love to share a photo of the boys, but I'm not going to do that on my business page. But if you can just imagine 2 cute little kids dressed up as ring security with a little briefcase with the rings in it. They even brought the rings up to us. It was just so cute. So thank you so much for allowing me to have that time. And again, allowing me to have some more time off for our honeymoon, which I haven't decided if I am going to take my computer and spend a day working while Cam plays golf or not. But we'll get there. Anyway, let's get into today's episode. I'm going to shut up. Actually, no, I'm not. I'm going to shut up about myself and I'm going to keep talking about someone else. So let's get into it. Welcome back to Exhuming the Truth. I am your host, Asha Carmody, forensic scientist and criminologist, and tonight's episode is one that sits at the very intersection of digital evidence and human vulnerability, with a little bit of mix of heavy unanswered questions, because in this case, we can see where someone went and we can trace their movements. Usually we don't get that kind of insight, right? But we can follow their path tonight step by step, and still we don't know what happened to them. In June 2019, an 18-year-old backpacker leaves a bar in Byron Bay after a night out. His name was Theo Hayez. He doesn't make it back to where he's staying that night, but his phone keeps moving and it maps a route not back to safety, but towards darkness and towards isolation, toward terrain that actually becomes increasingly dangerous the further you follow it. Tonight, we're talking about Theo Hayez, and we're going to walk through his final known movements and examine what the evidence can and cannot tell us. Who was Theo Hayez? Theo Hayez was 18 years old and he was from Belgium. He had just finished school and he was travelling through Australia before beginning university, which is something so many young people do. It's a period of independence and exploration and even growth. And by all accounts, Theo was responsible. He was structured. He was not someone known for taking unnecessary risks. And that baseline really, really matters in a case like this, because when we analyse a case, we're not just looking at what happened, we're looking at what is consistent and what's inconsistent and all of these things in relation to this person's very well-known behaviour. Now, the night was the 31st of May in 2019, and on this night, Theo was in Byron Bay. Byron Bay, as we know it to be, the popular coastal town, and it's known very well for its nightlife and its tourism and its backpacker culture. He actually attended a venue, and this venue was called Cheeky Monkeys. Now, come 11 p.m, he was asked to leave that venue, and there were reports suggesting that this was because he was intoxicated. Now, from here, everything changes, and it changes quickly. The timeline begins, and he leaves the bar, and he's left the bar on foot. So Theo's walking, and we know this because of his phone, and this is where the case becomes both incredibly detailed but also incredibly frustrating, because Theo's phone provides this digital trail, and one that investigators have been able to analyse extensively and somewhat rely on. He begins to use Google Maps, and instead of heading back towards his accommodation where he was staying, he takes a route that is unusual, and he moves through residential streets. So when he's walking through these residential streets, he continues walking for quite an extended period, and then he begins heading towards bushland, which is in the direction of a beach called Tallow Beach. Now, let's talk about the digital footprint here and the analysis of that, because this is where we need to slow down. And I think a lot of the time people are used to watching shows and thinking, great, we've got so much digital evidence, like we will find him. But this is the most important part of the case here. The digital evidence can feel, like I just mentioned, definitive to a lot of people. But in reality, it's actually up to interpretation. Now, Theo's phone from that night shows that there was movement over a significant distance. There was continued use of Google Maps, and this route that he took became increasingly illogical in a way. He's gone from, like a bar to residential streets to bush. So we have to ask, was Theo navigating somewhere specific? Was he following someone? Was he disoriented because he was kicked out for being intoxicated? Because these scenarios all lead us in completely different directions with where to look and recovery. And when we're talking about his intoxication and decision-making, we can't ignore the role of alcohol here. And this isn't by way of judgment. It's just the simple science of intoxication, because even being moderately intoxicated can impact your spatial awareness. We've all had a drink or two and, run into the doorway on our way in and things like that. Our decision making, we all know that we make decisions when we've been drinking that we wouldn't usually make when we're sober. Our risk assessment, a lot of injuries and things like that happen when we're intoxicated because for some reason we think, hey, we'll be fine if we do this next minute, we've got a graze down our leg or something like that. But if we combine moderate intoxication we'll go with being in an unfamiliar place. He's not from Australia. He's not from Byron Bay, okay? It's nighttime, so it's obviously visually difficult and geographically difficult for Theo in particular, and there's limited lighting in the area. So suddenly a simple wrong turn even doesn't feel so simple anymore, because that paired with the terrain, we're getting really muddy really early when we're analysing this case. The area that Theo was moving toward after the residential area into the bushland, that was not a forgiving area. And we're talking about dense bushland. We're talking about uneven surfaces, uneven ground, limited visibility. And if you think that the visibility in the residential areas is limited at nighttime at that time, you can just imagine how dark it is in dense bushland. And then, of course, at the end of the bushland, we have coastal cliffs in the surrounding areas. So this is a very, very high-risk area. And at night, in these conditions, being dark and, you're not familiar and you're intoxicated, you can get disoriented. Things can escalate really quickly. And once someone is off track, especially without proper lighting and without, awareness of where you are or even orientation, self-correction becomes extremely difficult. And there's a few things in this case that don't add up. And this is partially why I've done two parts. Today's part is very surface level. We're not going too deep. I'm giving you the layout of the case to keep it in your mind. Next week, we're going deep. Now, what doesn't add up here? Because this is where the case gets a bit more uncomfortable and unsettling, because despite extensive searches, Theo was never found. So we have to ask the most uncomfortable question. What happened to Theo and why that route? And why continue walking for that long? He walked for quite some time. He walked into the darkness instead of towards safety. And how, with such a detailed digital trail that we have here, is there still no resolution? Now, there's a couple of little sciencey bits I've thrown in here, and I've tried to make them as easy to understand as possible, but also with the science context behind it so that you can understand how important these points are in this particular scenario. Now, I've gone a little bit into neuroscience, and I've called this the drunk navigation effect. And a lot of people don't realize that alcohol, it's fun, okay? Let's be honest. We all, most of us have a drink, have a good time, and alcohol doesn't just, encourage us to have a good time, I guess, but it does impair your balance. And I think, most of us are aware of that at some point in time. Being under the influence of alcohol disrupts your spatial navigation in the brain, particularly a part of your brain called the hippocampus. So this essentially means that people can think that they're going the right way while they're intoxicated. They think they're going the right way and they're actually moving further away from where they should be. And what's fascinating and often misunderstood about this is that intoxication doesn't just make someone unsteady, it can actually fundamentally distort their internal map of where they are. So a path that looks irrational to you and I right now might have felt completely logical to Theo in that moment. And that's what I like to call the drunk navigation effect. You might be thinking that they're being comical or something like that, but actually in their brain, they think, no, I'm on track here. And that is something that could very well have happened to Theo in that moment. Now, the next point I want to make is something that we've all heard, the path of least resistance. But in criminology and behavioral science, this is literally a behavior type, the path of least resistance. So when we're disoriented, whether that be for, a number of reasons, not just intoxication, us as a species, as humans, we tend to follow open paths. We avoid obstacles and we move toward what seems like a route. And this is even if that path leads somewhere unsafe. It's just, it's a scientific fact to do with your behavior. It's what our brains default to, the easiest route. Whether, that might end up, like I've just said, somewhere unsafe. If it looks to be a nice, clean, wide path, that's where your brain is saying go that way, and you don't really think twice about it. Now, to add to that point, when we're talking about scientific evidence and the science behind search and rescue, there is something in search and rescue called the lost person behavior profile. And this speaks a lot about how different people behave when they get lost. And there's different profiles, for older adults, younger adults, and what have you. And Theo is only 18. So obviously he's a very young adult. And when we look at lost person behavior profiles for young adults, the stats tell us that the young adults tend to keep moving instead of stop. So they're less likely to stop and wait and kind of rethink things. They usually overestimate their ability to reorient. And they're less likely to stay put. And this is huge for Theo because this is actually movement itself and the continuous movement that, he was doing, which shows on his phone, it does increase the risk. Then we've got forensic taphonomy. So that is the coastal and bushland recovery reality. And this is something that most listeners don't understand because environments like Byron Bay, we have dense vegetation and that can conceal remains indefinitely. People always say, how hard would it be to find this XYZ? But it covers and it covers quickly. We have coastal processes. So this is like the tides, the tide changes, the erosion caused by the tide. All of this can move evidence very, very quickly. We, of course, have decomposition and scavenging in dense bushland that reduces visibility, and it's very, very, very common. Usually when remains are found in dense bushland like that, they're scattered because of scavenging. Sorry, I don't know what's going on with me. Oh, yes, I do. I actually just think it's my personality at this point. I keep saying, I don't know what's going on, but I think I get so ahead of myself that this is how I end up talking. So it's just who I am. I apologize. So forensically, or from a forensic perspective, really, the environments like this dense bushland that his phone has pinged at, this is like a coastal region, but it's still very dense bushland. It can significantly limit recovery. And that does mean even extensive searches don't always result in answers. So investigative bias, this is a huge one, which is called the last known point fallacy. So this is where investigators basically place too much weight on the last recorded location, even though it might not actually represent where the critical event actually occurred. So, because it's the last known location, they go hard and heavy, and then they've got a bias about it, and they kind of close off all other avenues when they're suggested or what have you. There's only a couple more of these scientific points. Sorry if I'm boring you, but they are very relevant to this case and to part 2. The cognitive overconfidence under impairment. So this one's fascinating, but what's particularly dangerous is that alcohol can obviously increase your confidence, but it also simultaneously decreases your capability. So that means that someone might actually feel in control while actually they're becoming more vulnerable. Then we've got the nighttime disorientation effect, where at night, even the familiar environments, which, by the way, were not familiar to him because he's from another country, he may have, frequented that area a little bit, but I'm going to go out on a limb here and say he did not know all those residential streets he was walking down. So it can very easily and quickly become disorienting. And in an unfamiliar place, like this was for Theo, essentially, that effect is amplified significantly. Then we have the absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. This is a huge one. It's very, very powerful. It's a classic forensic principle, but it's a very powerful one because in forensic science in particular, in crim too, but mostly in forensic science, we're constantly reminded that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and especially in environments where recovery is inherently difficult, like dense bushlands and coastal areas. My last little scientific point here is more behavioural than anything, and it just basically states that micro decisions can lead to major outcomes. And cases like this one, like Theo's, often aren't, what was I saying? They often aren't, defined. That's right. They often aren't defined by a single movement. So like he could have made one choice and that's actually been a ripple effect. And that could have been a series actually of small decisions that ultimately led to Theo going missing that night. So a huge one that people usually say, and bless everybody who does, because I know they're just trying to help, and it is very helpful when people comment suggestions. But a huge one when people go missing. We get the, have you checked the cell phone towers and where did they ping and things like that. And I want to talk about it because when we hear that someone's phone is involved, people go nuts thinking that we should be able to pinpoint them, because I guess authorities and TV shows kind of make it seem like that's the way it is, but it's not. When we hear that someone's phone, like Theo's phone, has mapped their movements, which it did, it feels very definitive and it feels like we've got answers. But actually, realistically, from a forensic perspective, that's just not entirely true, unfortunately. And digital data doesn't tell us what happened. It does tell us what appears to have happened, and it's based on signals, estimations, and user interaction, which was all very, very useful. And in a lot of cases like this, we wouldn't have what we have like we do for Theo here. In Theo's case, like a lot of the timeline is relying on that phone data, the GPS, app usage, movement tracking, and things like that. But it's very important for people to know that GPS isn't perfect. I'm going to get back into Theo's example in a minute, but I'm going to use another case example for this, of things not being accurate when people think they are and they should be. I agree that they should be, but they're just not. So, for example, when we were searching for Rob Snyder, the ANPR cameras, the automatic number plate recognition cameras, they're not accurate. They miss a lot of the time. I can't even tell you the inconsistencies that we came across with those cameras. And then we found that out on our own. Then we spoke to the police about it and they told us that. Then we spoke to a ANPR camera specialist who told us, there are so many limitations. That's just a very quick example for you. And in Theo's case, especially in environments like Byron Bay, I haven't been there personally. I have studied it a lot geographically for forensic purposes, but in this particular area, we have really dense vegetation. Like, it is so incredibly dense. And I do think I said on one of the episodes for Rob Snyder how dense, the bushland was that we were looking in. I couldn't see my partner 2 meters in front of me. So I imagine it's much the same. Very dense vegetation. It's uneven terrain. And of course, like I said before, we have that coastal interference. And those things also interfere with GPS. It actually happens where the signals from the phone can drift and the locations can either be slightly or sometimes even significantly off. And when you're trying to reconstruct someone's final movements, even small inaccuracies can change the entire interpretation. It becomes very hard because that investigative bias seeps back in and they take everything as Bible and that's the way it is, and they don't realize that things vary quite a lot. And then, of course, there's the issue of intent. Now, a phone can show us, where someone went. Yes, it showed us the track between the residential streets, which I'm going to share a map of, but it can't tell us why. What was the intent? Why did Theo go there? Was Theo following directions that he believed were correct? Was Theo given directions that he believed were correct? Was Theo trying to get somewhere specific? Was Theo following someone or trying to find someone? Like, there's so many questions around intent that are never going to be answered just from this digital evidence. He simply could have been disoriented and making decisions that felt logical in that moment, but they weren't. And importantly, the phone and the digital evidence don't capture context. And that being said, it certainly doesn't tell us who might have been nearby, or what Theo was thinking, or whether he felt safe, or whether he felt confused, or he was being pressured. It gives us movement. It gives us that movement without meaning, without context. And there's also something else to consider, and that's how we as the public interpret this kind of data. When we see a mapped route, we instinctively try to make it make sense. As humans, we look for logic, we look for intention, but not all human behavior, particularly under stress, fatigue, or intoxication, or a mixture, is logical. And while Theo's digital footprint is one of the most detailed aspects of this case, and yes, we are lucky to have it, it's also one that is the most misleading, because it's actually creating an illusion that if we just look closely enough to this digital evidence, we'll find the answer. But sometimes all it really shows us is how quickly a situation can unravel. I like to say that data can map a path, but it certainly can't tell us what happened at the end of that path. And I want to break it down carefully, without sensationalism, what could have happened to Theo. So we've got misadventure. This is obviously the most likely just because of the circumstances. He was disoriented, possibly due to alcohol. We know he was intoxicated at the time. He could have followed incorrect navigation or misinterpreted the directions. He enters terrain that becomes unsafe. Something happens, an injury, a fall, inability to navigate out. So many options. I also have to say that it's not common for someone to go missing due to misadventure and not be found, because usually a person wouldn't be overly concealed if something of innocence or an accident has happened. However, given, the terrain, the dense bushland and that coastal edge there, it's very, very possible. Then, of course, we have third-party involvement. There's no definitive evidence of this because we don't have Theo to analyse. How can we say that there was a third party involved unless there was CCTV footage or something else picked up? But also we can't rule that out. We don't know if he was meeting someone or if he was followed. There's no clear indication at all. Cases like this, they challenge people, and they challenge me as much as they challenge you, because as people we want certainty and we want justice for every case that we cover. We want a clear answer. We want a defined outcome. Nobody likes the not knowing. But from a forensic standpoint, we have to sit with probability a lot of the time. We do have to use statistics, as much as that undergraduate me would just make me sick to know that I'd be relying on statistics. I hated that subject so much, but I use it every single day because it's not just possibility. And in Theo's case, the most probable explanation is misadventure. And there's that word again, probable, is statistics. Probability isn't proof. That distinction matters, but it does help us a lot of the time. But behind all of this analysis is, of course, a family. This is a family who sent their son across the world expecting him to return, and instead they're left with a map, a digital trail of sorts, and no answers. It's incredibly sad. And it's incredibly sad that it happened on our shores. I like to think of our country as somewhere that it's not. I love to go back to me before I was exposed to the world that I live and work in now, and think Australia is the most beautiful, safest country. And it's just not. We've got a long way to go. And I'm very sorry to Theo's family that, they said goodbye to him and they didn't know that they were never going to see him again. I would love to help them if they are open to having help. I would love to, exhaust all of my professional connections to try and get help for you. because this is just, with all this digital evidence, it almost feels not good enough from us to give you no answers. So Theo Hayez, he came to Australia for an experience that so many people have safely every year, and something went wrong. And years later, we're still trying to understand what went wrong. And if you were in Byron Bay that night, or if you're from that area and, you remember anything, you know anything, something small, something big, you can contribute to this in any way, that might change everything. Like, we want to hear from you. You can text me, email me at any time. Happy to have a chat. At what point does a missing persons case shift from search to recovery, and how do we decide when that line has been crossed? Did we do enough for the Hayez family quick enough? I don't think we did. And I think that's our biggest downfall in missing persons cases, is that we do not give enough for long enough early on, and that's where the answers lie. And I think if we did search hard enough for long enough, we would have more answers, not just for Theo, but all of our families across the country. But thank you for joining me on Where is Theo Hayez? This is a part 1. We will come to you with part 2 after going through the inquest. And if you remember this case, let's chat about it. I'm going to pop some questions and a photo of the map of the area in our Sleuth Society group if you'd like to join us over there. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you have enjoyed it here. Thank you for all your support. You can contribute to supporting us help more families by subscribing on Facebook. It's $1.49 a month. That money goes straight into helping me help families and run each episode each week. That is my only form of income for Exhuming the Truth. And I want to make it affordable and accessible to everyone and anyone who's interested in being part and helping out. I do encourage you, if you have not already, to jump on to the Sleuth Society Facebook group under Exhuming the Truth Sleuth Society. You can join in conversations there. We have many of the family members waiting for answers in that group who are also willing to join in discussions. So please join us. And thank you so much for being here. Please share Theo's name, and we'll be back for part 2. My name is Asha Carmody. I am a forensic scientist, a criminologist, and human rights advocate. This is Exhuming the Truth. Thank you so much for being here.